Good morning and welcome to the Power to Your Business webinar. What you need to know as you consider the switch to solar, brought to us today by Solarsense. On-site renewable energy generation is helping thousands of UK businesses become more sustainable, reduce costs and achieve long-term energy security. In today's webinar, we address some of the questions and issues you may be facing as you consider the switch to solar energy, or even if you're expanding an existing solar installation. We have an expert panel to help us look at installation, funding and the broader commercial aspects, and of course, sustainability. My name is Dave Harries and I'm your host today. So let me first introduce our panel of experts. Tim Cook is one of Solarsense's renewable energy consultants. He has more than a decade of experience in the clean energy sector and works with a wide range of businesses to deliver strategic direction for their ongoing energy needs. Kathy Eberlin is a chartered engineer who has enjoyed senior design and planning engineering roles, including for renewable energy installers. She set up Leading Energy 15 years ago to provide renewable energy advice, including on funding options, for businesses wanting to design and deliver buildings with lower carbon emissions. Ben Goodare is Head of Sustainability at Renishaw, the world-renowned FTSE 250 engineering company. He has expertise in carbon accounting, net zero, responsible sourcing, and stakeholder engagement. And he's also a TEDx speaker, giving talks, among other things, about sustainability and climate change. And we are also hoping to be joined by Michael Gowen. He is the HSQE and Facilities Manager at Plasser UK. He's been delayed slightly, but hopefully he'll be here before long. His company specialises in the development and manufacture of machines and equipment for the renewal and maintenance of railway track, and now lead the market in modern track maintenance from their London base. Plasser UK provides training, parts and services for Network Rail and other partners. And last but certainly not least is Stephen Barrett. Stephen is the MD and founder in 1995 of Solarsense, which has since installed more than 15,000 renewable energy systems in the UK. As the sponsor of today's webinar, I'd like to invite Stephen now to kick us off with a little background to where we are and with regards to solar power, and the difference it's making. Stephen.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, at Solarsense, we're one of the UK's main solar companies. We specialize in solar power, heat pumps, solar carports, and energy storage is obviously the big latest thing. We recently moved to employee ownership. We're becoming a B Corp. And we're hosting this webinar to help businesses understand how solar power can help them decarbonize. I'd like to hand back to Dave now for the rest of the webinar.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay, so let's kick off this webinar by talking about some of the common myths, because I know all of our panelists will have been asked these questions from time to time. So I want to ask Tim Cook to address a few of these. So Tim, I'm thinking of things like people say, oh, can solar work in the UK because we don't have very good weather, and can my roof take them, and what about feed-in tariffs and that sort of thing? So could you address some of those common myths for us?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Dave. Obviously on a day like today, for me, it is actually relatively cloudy, but you'll be pleased to know that my solar system is still generating very well, as is most of the others that are here in the UK that we've already installed. I think one of the biggest myths is, do we get enough sunlight in the UK? And the answer is yes. It is more to do with daylight hours rather than just pure sunshine. So even on a day when it is cloudy or overcast that we get a lot of here, the system will generate. It is true to say that there may be a greater generation that happens when the sun is shining, but it's more to do with daylight hours. So obviously in the summer, you will find that your system is generating significantly more than in the winter. That's partly to do with the number of daylight hours, but it's also to do with the sun intensity. So, as a general guide, if I told you that you're only going to get 30, 40, maybe 50% more if you were in the Sahara Desert, then that would give you an idea as to how still valuable it is to have them here in the UK.
Yeah, that's very interesting, isn't it? Because you'd expect, obviously, if you're in a sunny desert, that you would get a lot more. But and what about the business of north and south facing and things like that? You know, you hear things about that too. Does that matter?
Yeah, well, I think that the general consensus at the early days of the feed-in tariff, which was all to do with the amount that you could generate, it was a south-facing roof was the only roof that you wanted to do. But now, because that was purely because that will generate the most power, but it does create quite a peak around lunchtime. In actual fact, if you've got an east-west facing roof, that can be even better than just a south-facing one, because you've got the whole roof area that you can use, and you'll find that the east side will generate more in the morning, the west side will generate more in the afternoon, and you have a much more even energy profile throughout the day, which enables you to use more of the power that is generated on site. And that's where the real savings are made, because now we don't have the feed-in tariff, the government subsidy. It's more to do with what you're saving on energy costs rather than what you're exporting to the grid. You will still get paid though for exporting power to the grid, so you certainly haven't missed the boat. You do get paid for what you export to the grid if your site doesn't use that power itself instantaneously.
Okay, well, thank you for addressing some of those myths, Tim, because I think, you know, as I say, there's probably a lot of misunderstanding about some of these things. So it's good to clear those up.
And just one other thing, Dave, just to mention as well, if you have got a north-facing roof, that's still worth doing as well, which nearly everybody discounts. But if you've got a relatively shallow pitch, and Renishaw can talk to this, is that they installed the south-facing aspect first, and then once they'd got the proof of concept, we could demonstrate that in our computer models, you're only going to generate maybe 20% less, 15% less using the north aspect. It's absolutely worth doing if you've still got that energy demand on site.
Well, thank you for that. Ben Goodare from Renishaw, as Tim mentioned you then, let's talk to you a little bit. I'm very interested to hear your views on that business of the north-south facing roof and things like that. But I also want to ask you a sort of more a basic question, really, about, you know, why do this? Why you know, you Renishaw have gone down this road. So I want to know why you did it, and, you know, what was the motivation, I suppose, behind that?
I think our original motivation, absolutely honestly, was it was a requirement for some planning permission we needed. We wanted to build a new building and we had to put solar panels on it. What we did is we contacted various solar companies and ended up working with Solarsense and looked at maximizing that investment. And so, as Tim said, we covered the whole south side of our roof. And then we also put brise-soleils on the front, which are a type of solar panel as well. And it proved very quickly that this is a great way to save a lot of money. Our original installation, I think the return on investment was kind of 9 years. But, you know, that's changed considerably. That return on investment profile has changed, and we quickly started putting solar panels on every roof we could within the UK and then overseas as well. And I don't believe we actually have a viable roof in the UK left without solar panels on it.
I mean, we talk a lot about energy security these days. How much does that feed into what your motivation, do you think, now that you know how it works and all that sort of thing? Is energy security an issue for you, because you know you've always going to have electricity during daylight hours anyway from these systems?
Yeah, it can be. I mean, we're fairly energy intensive, so whilst we have a lot of generating capacity, it's about 15% of our electricity demand. Now, 15% off your electricity bill is a significant amount of money every year. But I think, you know, our goal in the future is energy independence, is where we would like to be, because that completely protects you from geopolitical things happening that affects the prices of your energy. But also, the only way to get zero carbon electricity is to generate it yourself. Because if you buy renewable electricity, there is still a carbon footprint of that being transmitted around the grid. And so if you want to get to zero carbon, you have to self-generate.
I guess
Yeah.
the problem there, Ben, is the fact that solar power alone struggled to do that, won't it?
Yeah.
Because we then end up in the situation that you have such a surplus in the summer when it's generating 5-6 times more than it is in the winter. That's where it becomes very difficult. So it almost needs to tie in then with other technologies, which is storage, but probably also wind and or hydro and whatever else you could throw at it. So I do think generally, as we found with Renishaw, to try and get to off-grid scenario for most businesses is very difficult.
You're absolutely right. And wind and hydro have got to be in the mix, as well as storage, and the ability to sell it back to the grid if possible. There is, I think, like with most things in my field in sustainability, there isn't an answer. It's always multiple things create the answer to the challenge.
Stephen, could I just bring you in for a second? Because obviously you've been, as I mentioned in the introduction, you've been doing this since 1995. And I wonder if you feel that the motivations have changed for your customers over the years, with this business of energy security and sustainability, obviously, but also, saving money and the economics of it, the finance of it. I mean, what's your sort of feeling about that as the years have passed, bringing us up to 2023?
Originally it was mainly green thinking people, even hippie types, and surprisingly the types, but it was people who just wanted to see renewable energy ahead of their time, really. But now it's clearly it's a business decision. It's changed so much, even beyond the feed-in tariff. Now solar panels have become much cheaper. This electric hike has shocked everybody, really. That it's security of power. It's as Ben was saying from Renishaw, you need to have at least some of your power on your own roofs. You've got these roofs here, why not use them?
Yeah. And Tim, is that your sort of feeling as well, that that's it's really very much a business decision now? I
think it is both. It is the financial one for sure in the last 18 months since the spike in energy costs, where we've seen return on investments just tumble with the massive explosion of energy. But it's more and more companies wanting to do the right thing or needing to do the right thing regarding the carbon, and something that their clients are expecting of them. We had it with the dairy farmers going back a few years ago with the likes of Waitrose, and we're now seeing it through many of our suppliers saying that their fund managers for their investment property portfolio, or indeed some of the supermarkets, are demanding that their suppliers are meeting a proportion of their energy needs through renewable energy, and not just buying it through the likes of Good Energy, but actually installing it themselves and generating it homegrown.
Yeah. Let's move on to the next part of the conversation. Well, I wanted to know, for a company that is interested in going down this route but hasn't done so yet, hasn't sort of done anything about it, where do they start? Is there a sort of obvious place to sort of, make the first inquiries? I mean, other than obviously going to a company like Solarsense, but Tim saying me.
Yeah.
But Tim, because obviously people are going to want to get information as well as, finding out about the commercial aspects. So talk to me a bit about that. If you're starting out on this route, Tim.
Yeah, I think you're right. Whilst we'd love everybody to come to us, that's not necessarily always going to be the case. But go to a specialist, have a conversation about what you're trying to achieve. We need to know basic things like, what is the energy consumption of the site? What property are we talking about? What the roof structure is? And your unit cost, so that we can give you a really clear idea as to the sort of system size that you could fit on your roof. And also, what is the right size for you? It might be that you've got a massive expansive roof, but that you only need to use maybe half of it or a third of it in order to meet your energy demands. It may be that you decide that you want to go carbon neutral, in which case we can look at the overall consumption throughout the year and design a system that will generate that same amount of power so that you can sort of tick that box. So I think it's a case of understanding what open up that conversation really. What are you trying to achieve? Come to a company like us so that we can talk you through that process. And we go through what's called a feasibility study, because whilst most companies would like to sort of say, yes, I'll put solar on, the reality is there are a few things that can become stumbling blocks. So we deal with that as a feasibility before you've invested an awful lot of money. We charge a small fee to do an application to the grid, a planning application, check that your building's strong enough, analyze your data, do a formal system design, all of those sorts of things. So you've then got a nice tidy package that can be delivered to the board or to the MD or the financial controller to then make a decision on.
And Ben, when you started out down this road at Renishaw, I know you said it was part of a planning application, but I mean, finding out about solar and that sort of stuff, was that difficult when you first started?
No, it wasn't difficult. I think what was difficult, like a lot of these newer industries, there is a lot of so-called experts, and then there are some experts. And I think that was the challenge, sifting through who actually was going to be able to be a long-term partner for us. And I think like a lot of decisions, we did a bit of an experiment and we used Solarsense to do that, and and actually their expertise allowed us to have the confidence to carry on investing in solar in many places. And they are the only people we work with in the UK. And I guess I would reiterate what Tim said and find someone who really knows what they're talking about, because it is more than just throwing some panels on your roof. It's a lot more technical than that. And I work in a company with something like 3,000 engineers in it, a lot of them electrical, and a lot of them can do the maths, but actually we needed to go and find some experts who knew about the planning and knew about the grid connection, knew about the integrity of the roof and could it take the load and all the rest of it. And they're all things you really need someone who knows what they're talking about for.
Yeah, exactly. So Tim, I wanted to ask you a little bit now, as we're assuming one has made the decision that you want to go down this route, but there's a lot of stuff flying around about national grid and whether you can sell your electricity back and all that sort of thing, and I know you mentioned earlier the feed-in tariff and stuff like that, which I know is gone now, but so tell me about that. I mean, are there, because it can be a bit negative sometimes, and is that right, or are people just misunderstanding?
Well, I think first of all, let's just mention the feed-in tariff again, because that does get brought up quite a lot. We've missed the boat now, we've missed the feed-in tariff. So the feed-in tariff really, I guess, should have been called the generation tariff. It was a government subsidy that you got paid for every unit that you generated, whether you used it on site or exported it. And that was really only ever designed to help the transition to renewables whilst prices were very high. And as Steve said, the price of panels and the improvement in technologies that have changed dramatically over the last 10 years that I've been in the industry. And they're now offering a good return on investment without any government subsidy. So whilst the feed-in tariff doesn't exist, the export tariff still does. And I think that was what Ben was saying earlier, is that you do accept that you're going to be exporting maybe some in the summer if you want to try and meet more of your winter demand, and you need to have that grid connection capability to do that. And that is where there have been some problems recently. So as the deployment of renewable energy continues to grow, which is brilliant, it does mean that the national grid is under strain. And in particular areas, as Ben will attest to, there are certain areas that are more under strain than others. And it can do one of two things. Either it can restrict what you can install, your total system size, or in most cases, and more hopefully, it will restrict what you can export to the grid. And that one is much easier to overcome, because in the event that you might want to put 500 kilowatts on your roof because you're going to use most of it, but the grid says, well, you can't export more than 100, you could actually go ahead and put the 500 kilowatt system on, but just install what's called a grid limitation device that only costs, $1,000 or $2,000 to install. and means that you protect the grid to that 100 kilowatt limit to enable you to have the savings of the bigger system. The problem does come if the grid turns around and says, well, no, sorry, the grid infrastructure is such with fault level current issues, you can only install 100 kilowatts, in which case that is just the way it is until there is system upgrades that happen. And we would just work with the grid to try and get you on the waiting list, as it were, so that when the grid capacity does improve, which it will do over the coming years, that you're towards the top of the queue to look to expand your system and just view then that 100 kilowatt as being your proof of concept, if you like. You do that bit first and then you come back and do the larger scheme at a later date. But I guess the message there is get in before your neighbours. You know, if you are thinking about it, one of the first things to do is to come to a company like ours, decide on the system size, get a formal application in so that you've got a grid offer there. They will be timed, so you will have to act relatively quickly. But once you've accepted it, you've then normally got 6 months to actually install the project and have it commissioned.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to welcome Michael Gowen to the webinar. Michael, it's so nice to see you. We were getting worried about you. I hope you weren't having power issues.
No, we weren't. No, the new software. We've got a dark trace, which is blocks a lot of emails and spams and ransomware. And,
oh right, well that's good. But listen, Ben, Michael, you've really obviously you missed the beginning of the conversation, but we were talking about things like energy security and sustainability. Tim was expelling some of the myths for us around solar energy, but I wonder. We're getting questions from our people in the audience as well about solar independence, for example, saying that's, you know, because Ben talked about that earlier and how their goal is to be you know, basically self-sufficient. I wonder whether you feel that that's something that is achievable and worthwhile aiming for.
I think so. Well, firstly, a lot of our all of our machines are sold to Network Rail, and part of the procurement process with Network Rail is that all suppliers should be signed up to science-based targets, and that came out of COP26. And what we're looking at doing is trying to get by 2030 to net zero. So therefore, working backwards. We're looking at how much electricity we use in a factory, how much gas we use. So we've got lots of data and information. So what we're looking at doing is, where we can, is be less reliant on the electricity board during working hours, with basically daylight hours. So currently we're looking at, sorry about the pun there, we're looking at June to September, not purchasing any electricity from the grid during manufacturing hours. Later on, I'll be talking to Solarsense about battery storage, that sort of technology, and also using the solar energy to charge our fleet of company vans and cars. So we're looking at moving forward and trying to be less reliant on the network.
Okay, good. So clearly it is feasible. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned, Michael, batteries there, because actually that's the next section, and which I want to put to Tim, because again, you know, there's myths and stories around batteries, and they're expensive or they don't work or what have you. But there seems to be recently have been more talk about batteries and that they can be a good thing. So what's the sort of overview situation with batteries, Tim, would you say?
I think, yes, they are expensive. One of the misconceptions is that maybe they're relatively cheap, and they're not. You know, you are talking for a 100 kilowatt hour battery, you could be talking 75,000, 80,000 pounds. So they're not small bits of kit. Having said that, I think in the increase in electricity costs that we've seen over the last 2 years, that has been the turning point for batteries. As a general rule, we tend to think about 12, 13p per kilowatt hour as being the actual cost of storing power in a battery, in a commercial battery. So if the difference between what you're exporting the power at and buying the power at is only 11, 12, 13p, there's absolutely no point in doing it. However, if that difference is significantly more than that, or if you can also take advantage of off-peak charging in the winter in particular at night at a cheap rate, then there is an argument to look at it. But it can, if you just consider it as a soak for the solar excess instead of export, and then the slight off-peak charging rate, it can still take quite a long time to pay back. So we're talking in excess of 10 years, in many cases 15 years, depending on the rates that you're paying. And that's if you were to charge and discharge every single day. The issue that we often have is that companies often only have the surplus of power at the weekend. And if that happens, then the possibility of a battery really devalues, because instead of charging it 365 times a year, you're actually doing it 52 times a year. And therefore the economics then become way out of kilter. The only changing factor in that is that we've now have the ability, or on a commercial large-scale battery, grid-scale batteries, they can access frequency response, demand-side response, grid balancing fees that are available through National Grid and the power companies to try and stabilise the fluctuating demands within the grid infrastructure on a daily basis. Through aggregators, the likes of Gridim, we can now work with smaller batteries behind the meter, so that sort of 100, 200 kilowatts that we've just been talking about, and access some of those revenue streams. And that can make a real difference to the economics of a battery. So I think my takeaway comment is it's worth considering. However, it does really need to be a day-by-day sort of charge basis rather than only at the weekend. And you can access these frequency response fees and these other income revenue streams, but they are a little bit more volatile. And so we can't maybe give you such definitive long-term figures as we can on the energy savings. But it is worth considering. My final point is our preference would be put it, because they are quite expensive, put in a solar system. Everything we do is battery compatible. Analyze it, monitor it, understand how you're working with your energy system for a year. And at the end of that year, let's look at the data and then design exactly the right size system for you so that we're not over-speccing or under-speccing a relatively expansive extra bit of kit at an early stage.
Yeah, that seems like excellent advice. So you make the decision based on the evidence rather than a sort of feeling.
A computer model.
Yeah. Ben, do you use batteries at Renishaw?
Sorry, what was that?
I was just wondering whether you use batteries with your installations at Renishaw.
No, it is something we've looked at previously. It was quite a long time ago, and because of the size, we would essentially need grid-sized batteries to be useful for us. So we were looking at multiple shipping container-sized batteries, which was a bit price. Right, put us all off a little bit on the price.
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised, given what Tim just said. But
yeah. I think the important thing for Renishaw, though, Ben, is that it appears that you're using nearly everything that you're generating anyway.
Yeah.
So, and that's the joy of a commercial system rather than a domestic one. At a domestic level, it absolutely makes sense because you're out at work all day, or if you've gone back to the office, you're generating power. You come home, you turn on your kettle, you make your dinner, and you need the power. Then the battery absolutely makes sense.
To work on my phone.
But for a business, that's very different.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Okay. Well, look, I think that Michael, have you got any comments about the battery issue?
Well, what we want to try and do is we don't start till 7 o'clock in the morning, so the sun's up at 4 in the summer. So we're looking at putting at least 2.5 hours worth of electricity into a battery storage. And fortunately, we finish at 5 o'clock. So they're long days, but 5 o'clock, and then the sun doesn't go down. Maybe with a bit of luck till sort of 9, 10 o'clock. So we're looking at another 5 hours. So potentially, we've got 7 hours in the summer to store. So 7 days a week, and then weekends. Then we could do 24 hours for Saturdays and Sundays. We finish at 1 o'clock on a Friday. which is excellent. So that's a 40-hour week sort of thing, but not for managers, as you well know. I'm looking at, we've got vending machines that are refrigerant and in the canteen. So my idea is to use the battery storage to do the fridges in the sandwich machine at night, and also do the external perimeter lighting. And if I've got something left over, then look for a system for our IT servers, which are really, really hungry, as you can imagine.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. I think that we've covered the battery issue really well there, and thank you, Tim, for that. So the message really is, you've got to do the calculations to work out whether it's worthwhile, and it might be. It might be. We've had a question, Tim, that's come up from the audience, and I want to put this to you quickly. This is from Stephen Rothen, who says he read a scare story at the weekend regarding the disposal of panels at the end of their life and how that compromises the whole life greenness of solar panels. Have you got anything to comment on that question?
Yeah, I don't know whether, Steve, you have, but
I did read that myself. It's partly written wrong, really. They're saying after 20 years, but you see, solar panels are guaranteed 25 years, but most of them are over 50. I went to the main World Show last year, and some of them are now a 70-year life. So they're not going to suddenly stop working in 20 years. They just start reducing. And all companies sign up to a solar panel recycle system, or the vast majority of them do. And 90, I think even on that article, it says, I think 99% can be recycled. So it was slightly a strange story, I thought, but it's good to point these things out.
I mean, at the end of the day, Dave, the solar panels are largely made up of aluminium, recyclable, glass, aluminium, glass, recyclable, copper cables, recyclable. So there is quite a lot of them which will be recycled. I'm not sure that there's a valid consideration, really, considering the fact that they are, as Steve said, still expected to be at least 85% as efficient as they were installed over 25 years. That's the warranty on them for the power output warranty. So they're not suddenly going to drop off a cliff after that.
Yeah. Oh, well, I hope that's reassured Stephen. And as he says in his question, it was a scare story, and I suppose that's the definition of a scare story. They're meant to scare you, but it sounds like there's not much basis for that. Kathy, I wonder whether I know you've reconnected to us now via a different method, and I'm hoping you can hear me okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, excellent. That's such good news, because I was really worried we weren't going to be able to use your contributions at all. So we had a question which came in a little earlier, and I delayed asking it because we couldn't get you on the line. But basically, somebody in the audience has asked about the issue of solar independence. But they're saying, what about the capital expenditure involved in that? Because, it's all very well saying, yes, we'd like to, get as much of our power from solar as possible. But they're wondering, how you go, do you have to find all the money up front? I'm gonna put that question to Tim as well. But Kathy, what's your sort of view on that?
Is this for domestic or
no?
Commercial?
I think this is for commercial, for a business. Yeah.
Well, I think there's always a solution. It depends on what risk profile you've got for your business. And also, I find with some of my commercial clients, it depends on what other investments they've got going on at the same time. So it's possible to borrow the money at pretty low interest rates, or get a funded option, for on the PPA arrangement or hire purchase. But on the hire purchase, you obviously end up paying more, but because you're saving so much on your electricity, what you've got to remember is that if you do nothing, you're hemorrhaging money, because you're spending, 45 pence a kilowatt hour before the discounts. I mean, I've just done some commercial customers, and if they carry on with doing nothing, their electricity bills will have doubled, and they can't create 4 times the turnover to cover that with profit. So you're kind of forced to make an investment anyway, really. So for me, it's a no-brainer. Everybody needs to do it now.
Yeah.
So just to pick up on that, Dave, I just wondered whether, yeah, just to explain those three funding models really. So obviously you've got the capital investment yourself, which can be quite just a good way to do it if you're lucky enough to just have cash reserves. And there's full, at the moment, offset on that capital expenditure, which is quite attractive in year one. Option two would be, as Kathy said, the hire purchase or an asset finance route where you can finance 100% of the equipment cost, and normally spread that over 7-8 years, something like that, which means that it's cash flow neutral or cash flow positive during that period whilst it's paying itself back. And the third option, I guess, is for those that have got a very low risk profile, as you were saying, Kathy, and don't want to look at taking any kind of borrowing, is that they consider a PPA. So a PPA is a power purchase agreement. That's what it stands for. And it means that a third party investor will work with the installer to fund the system themselves, and they will pay us to install the system on your roof. And they will then have a lease with you to provide you the power that you that is generated by the solar system at a discounted rate, normally quite a discount from what your current wholesale rate is. So it is a way that if you really don't have any capital that you wish to invest and you still want to go ahead and do it, for systems which are over kind of 200 kilowatts in size, you can look at a power purchase agreement and go down that route instead.
Okay, all right. So I want to talk now a little bit about what happens if you want to sort of add to your existing solar panels. So you want to, you're already using solar, but you want to sort of add to it. But you might have, there might be various issues that are in your way. It might be planning issues, or it might be just space. And I know I was very interested in what Ben was saying earlier about how they covered virtually every bit of space they could find in the Renishaw estate with solar panels. So what about this issue? If you have got, you've already covered your roof. So where do you go next? What are the other options that might be available to you? I mean, Ben, could I bring you in and say, how did you solve those problems?
It was just looking where else was possible. So the first thing we did once our roofs were full was put some ground mounted solar panels in, because we had a spare bit of land on one site. And then we looked around and realized, actually, like many commercial premises, we have very large car parks that just sit there. And so last year we built our first carport, which covered one of our car parks at our factories, which then enabled us to cover that new roof with solar panels. And there's multiple knock-on benefits of this. One, the employees like the fact that they can park the cars out of the rain, out of the snow, and out of the sun. So it's much more pleasant getting back to the cars at the end of the day. But also, because of the infrastructure requirements, it allowed us to put in the ducting, which enables us to support electric vehicle charging on those carports and expand it easily. And we can just keep adding electric vehicle charging points. But also, when we thought about it, we were quite astonished to realize that the return on investment, despite the fact that all the civil work and all the steel goes in to these carports, the return on investment was actually still better than our original solar installation, which was about 10 years ago. Yeah. Just because of the efficiencies and improvements in solar panels, and also the price of electricity, it's an incredible return you can get at the moment.
Yeah. And just to say as well on that then, Ben, and that was a FIT registered system, wasn't it, that you did initially at Stoneman?
Yeah, initially, yeah. Yeah, so initially we got the feed-in tariff, so the generation payment, but also we were able to export a really good price. And now you don't get a generation payment, and actually the export price isn't amazing. And as Tim has talked about earlier, there are times you can't export anyway, but still the return on investment was far better.
Yeah, that's very good news, isn't it? That
Yeah.
it is that is the case. And Kathy, I mean, are there other options for companies? You know, I know in an earlier discussion with you, you talked about leasing land, for example, to put solar panels on for commercial companies. I mean, have you, in your experience, advising companies, have you come across other solutions for installing more solar?
My customers are still at the stage where I'm trying to get them to put them on their roof. I mean, some people have just done, big solar farms where they've got land. The only time I think I've looked at leasing is where we've tried to look at turbines, and people then need the right spot for the turbines, so they're then trying to lease some land off somebody. So people are amenable to having land leased, and I would encourage people when you've got a commercial site and you can see there's land around you, so people are open to that. So it's really good to explore all those options. If you and just going back to what the guy was just saying then, basically it's a really good idea to do what you can, and obviously the extending start with your roof, because basically you need to be using as much as you can on your own site, and there comes a point where you're making too much in the summer, and then you need the grid connection. So you really need to also understand your profile and your own usage, and you also need to future-proof what you're doing, because if you electrify your site, you say you're currently on gas, and you then have to convert all that to heat pumps, which you'll have to do in the next 10 or 15 years, then your profile for consumption will change. So you still need to do your energy efficiency savings. So I think, what Tim was saying there about the feasibility study, looking at your half-hourly data and actually understanding what your site is doing, is all part of investing in solar as well.
Yeah. Michael, at Plasser UK, have you had to do anything sort of really innovative in terms of finding places to put solar panels?
Well, we're looking at our carports, talking to Russell, one of your managers there. What I would like to say, going really, really back to the very start, is I think it's very, very important when you're working with Solarsense or another contractor, is have a really good relationship with the project manager. And if you can get them down to site very early on, so you can kick the tires, go around the site and have one point of contact. Relationships with the reason why I used Solarsense is I had a turnkey contract. I had a roof that was leaking. I got the roof repaired and I put solar panels on it. So it's important to do that. So we're looking at getting prices for doing our carports, and we're looking at then putting on. Unfortunately, the factory is over 100 years old, so we've got these roofs that have got asbestos cement roofs. So there's another challenge. So
just on that, the asbestos cement roofs, because nobody likes working on them, and us included. An option that a lot of clients are moving to now is to overclad those roofs. So appreciating that not all buildings are strong enough to do that, but a lot are, with only a little bit of reinforcement. So effectively you encapsulate your asbestos sheet with a trapezoidal metal sheet over the top. And that then means that we can quite cheaply and easily install solar panels. And in actual fact, if you then look at the whole project as the return on investment, because the solar panels are so good, you can almost overclad your asbestos roof, get a new roof, and get your solar system and have an ROI that makes sense.
Yeah, and also what I've noticed now is that where the traditionally you'd always put south facing, our site we can get east to west. So we're looking at putting solar panels that were traditionally you wouldn't think about, but because they get more and more efficient, you're getting from 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning till 12 o'clock midday, and then one side, and then from 12 o'clock then to 10 o'clock in the evening. So you're getting east to west, and sometimes I think you get more energy out of the east to west than you would to south facing.
Yeah, that is the modern thinking, east west, because that will start earlier and finish later.
Yeah,
it's not just due south anymore.
Yeah, and morning and afternoon, of course.
Yeah.
As Tim said right at the beginning, before you joined us, Michael,
Sorry.
no, that's fine.
Brilliant.
But Tim gave us a great explanation of that, so that was really good. But listen, we've got a question now from from our audience. Edward Merion is asking, why do the inverters only last around 10 years before they have to be replaced? So, Tim, I think that sounds like one for you.
I don't really know the technical answer, apart from the fact that unfortunately they just do. So yeah, a standard string inverter anyway. So if you went for a Solar Edge optimized solution, they do last a bit longer. They tend to come with a 12-year warranty, and they have then the power optimizers that come with a 25-year warranty. But a standard string inverter, yeah, I mean, it is an electrical piece of equipment. It does have various different components in it, and they do come normally with a 5-year warranty, and they're expected to last 10 to 15 years. So in all of our suggestions, you can either insure it, so you take out insurance at the beginning to extend that warranty to 25 years, but that actually, you're probably better self-insuring it and just accepting in the economics of the whole project that you've got to allow, you know, a few grand here after 10, 15 years to cover the replacement. The joy of doing that way is that if you took out the insurance, it's a similar cost to the cost of the inverter, but you're only going to get the inverter that you bought in the first place. Whereas it may well be there are improvements in inverter technologies in 10 years that either cost-wise or generation-wise that you would actually rather take over instead.
Yeah.
Can I just add a point there? I think what I was saying earlier, or in my commentary, was that when we had our system fitted in 2015, they said, the contractor said, it's fit and forget. These systems are not fit and forget anymore. You've got to put up man-safe or person-safe systems. They've got to get access to the solar panels to maintain them and check the MC4 plugs. And also you've got to look at cleaning them. And also is looking at maintaining your inverters. Yeah. So they've got fans in them, so you can just imagine all the debris that's in the air, especially in a factory. These need taking apart, blowing out and cleaning, and your inverters will last longer if you maintain them.
Well, yeah. Michael, thank you very much for talking about that, because I was about to ask a question about maintenance, actually, and get Tim to weigh in on that. And I think Tim was wanted to come in anyway. Talk to me in general about maintenance, Tim, you know, with these systems.
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, it was probably misadvised rather than a change in technology that now means that they do need maintaining. They should always have been maintained, really. But the reality is that, yeah, the solar panels will sit and just do their thing, really. However, it is advisable to at least every year or every 2 years to have a service. And we would normally suggest that that would involve coming to an electrician, coming to site, or your site electrician, and testing the resistance on the strings to check the ratings, and we can then see whether there is an issue there that needs to be investigated further. We can also give the inverter a quick service to make sure, as you were just saying, Michael, there isn't any debris that's been sucked into it from the fans that's going to cause any problems. Give it a quick clean if it needs to. And like any bit of electrical equipment, really, I mean, you don't buy a car and expect that you've only ever got to put fuel in it. You do expect it to last, and you don't expect it to break down on you, but you do expect to take it to a garage and service it every year and have an MOT done on it after it's a couple of years old. And really exactly the same with the solar system. We don't expect any horrific costs. We don't expect any major breakdowns, but you do have to look after it. And it's good, just a way of being to keep these things maintained. So, you know, to give you an idea on a maybe even 100 kilowatt system, you're not looking at massive costs. It could be, you know, a day's labor on site, so 500-600 quid or something, but it just then means that you know that your site is being looked after and is safe.
And Ben, is maintenance a big sort of thing? Is it a headache? Is it an easy thing for you to deal with?
I wouldn't say it was a big thing or a headache. I mean, as Michael said, you've got to make sure your roof is safe to access. So we've had to put some safety lines in and things. But you know, ultimately, someone needs to clean the windows and someone needs to clean the solar panels. and actually it's the same person for us.
You've doubled the workload.
Yeah, and they were, our local window cleaner was very happy. And yes, inverters do break, and they do need maintaining and looking after, but so does all other plant and equipment you have. I don't think it's exceptional to solar panels to require a preventative maintenance program. It's part of owning and looking after a building. It's just adding in that to everything else. And I think if you're sensible, if you've got the resource and you've got your own site electricians, it's great. It's just another job on the list to do. If not, getting an electrician in is not an expensive thing to come in and do that kind of annual service. Like Tim said, it's hundreds of pounds for quite a large install rather than thousands or tens of thousands. It's not a big expense.
And it is far less than most other things like moving parts of wind power or boilers where there's far less maintenance. But it's true, it does need maintenance.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got another question from our audience now. There's a chap called George Browning has posted a question. He says he's worked with Solarsense for around 20 years, so you may know him. And he uses solar PV and battery storage, which he says caters for most of his needs during the summer months, but in the winter months, sometimes not. And he's looking at possibly other technologies, for example, small scale wind and that sort of thing. And he's wondering whether any of the panel can offer any insight into that, into, I suppose, supplementing, the excellent the excellent sort of power generation he gets in the summer, helping that a bit in the winter. I mean, Tim, do you come across that sort of thing where people are looking at other technologies?
Yeah, I don't know whether Kathy's better placed to answer that, but yes, I do, and I would normally refer them to wind, but it's not something that we can necessarily do. But
yeah, well, Kathy, I mean, do you have you?
I've been looking at this quite a lot because I've been doing ESOS audits this year, which is basically the energy audits required originally by the EU directive, and part of that is to come up with action plans to get to net zero. So, like you say, PV will do a big chunk, hopefully 60%. And then you need, you're especially going to need some contribution in the winter. So some of the policies are working against us. So the fact that you can't really easily get onshore wind because of the planning problems, but I suspect that will change. And also if you get more support within your region, then basically once it gets into as a sort of designated areas, particularly say for a solar farm or a turbine, you then might be able to get planning. But that's the main constraint. The other thing with wind turbines really is that they work much better the bigger you go. So it really is a good idea to try and put half a megawatt or a megawatt in. You can get 100, 200 kilowatt turbines, but you're not getting as much bang for your investment. But you do get very good, if you get 6 meters a second, you can get good contributions. So I think we're going to have to see more local wind turbines, otherwise we won't get to net zero with a local contribution. You'll be relying on offshore turbines to do that.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. So a combination may be advisable in certain circumstances. Kathy, while I've got you there, and we can hear you really well now, I'm delighted to say, and we can see you.
Sorry about that.
No, not at all. And I wanted to ask you very quickly about people who lease their buildings.
Yes.
Because obviously there's an issue there, isn't there? If you want to go down this route, but your building is leased. So what would you say to them if you were asked that?
Well, it varies hugely across the commercial sector because some people who lease buildings are in a stable business situation. They've been in that building for a while. They've got a stable business model and they're happy to invest in PV on a lease building. Again, always you've got to look at the roof structure. As Tim was saying before, you've got to make sure that roof's good for 25, 50 years. So often when you start looking at PV projects, it's not just the PV, it's the whole thing. But for some people where it's sort of multi-tenanted situation, that's harder. Or if you've got a situation where you're not sure whether you need to be in that building in 5 years' time. So sometimes companies will find that difficult then to invest. And I think we're going to need some new collaboration with landlords. I'm hoping that there might be some tougher policies as well to force landlords' hands on this, because sometimes they will invest in a new industrial building because then it's much easier to lease that building. So I think there may be there's some benefit when you come to negotiate your lease. If you're a leaseholder, is you really need to look at this, especially if you think, well, I might need to leave in 5 years. Then what kind of buyout clause can you get in terms of the risk of the panels on the roof? So I don't know the answer, but we definitely need some solutions that deal with that issue. Someone has to underwrite that risk. I don't know.
The good news is, oh, sorry.
I was just going to ask you whether you come across this issue a lot.
Yeah, I think the good news is, Kathy, that we've been approached over the last couple of years with a much larger number of commercial landlords that are looking at deploying solar across their portfolio. So initially the conversation has started with the tenant going, I need to save electricity, and has gone to the landlord to say, can I put solar PV on my building? And the landlord has actually turned around and gone, oh, that's quite a good idea. Maybe we should be looking at doing that once they understand the ROI opportunities, because it's adding value to their real estate. It's making their property more attractive for tenants, and it's also adding them a revenue stream. If you are able to get, even by selling the tenant discounted electricity, if the landlord is still getting over a 10% ROI on their money, for them, that's a win-win all the way round. So I think that is changing, certainly over the last couple of years. That's what I've seen. Okay, good. All right. Ben, have you sort of had any of the situation? I mean, I don't know do whether Renishaw own all their buildings or whether you lease some of them or that sort of thing, but has that ever been an issue?
No, we own our buildings and are actually a landlord in some of our buildings, which we have also covered in solar panels because it makes sense.
So the tenants have to put up with the solar panels. That's good. I like that. All right. Listen, we've had another question from this is a slightly loaded question actually from Paul Smith. He says, if we get 3 quotes in for solar install and all have similar forecasts in terms of costs of install and savings on power, what additional criteria should we choose for the best provider? Now, I'm putting you on the spot, Stephen and Tim here. So we have 3 looking quotes. What do I do?
I think you should look at the companies that are part of Solar Energy UK. There is a trade body, we've been members about 20 years, because there's a lot of startup companies, and looking how long they've been going, their experience. But yes, it's not about the cheapest. It's certainly not.
Yeah, but in this, I mean, in Paul Smith's example, he's saying they all cost the same. So what, so how do I choose? Tim, have you got?
Well, I would suggest if it has Solarsense in the title, that's how you choose. But no, in all seriousness, I guess, yeah, if they are the same price, you're then going to be looking at the quality of the quote itself. But I guess more importantly is are you being spec'd? Are you just being spec'd, 100 solar panels and an inverter, or has those panels been named, and do we know what they are? There are considerations over the quality of the panels and also the origin of those panels to make sure that they're being made to the best possible standards, including the best possible welfare for the people that are making them. So that is definitely a consideration, and we would be happy to talk to you further on that. But the biggest thing that we come across is that not all quotes are including the same things. For instance, if you've got multiple inverters, is it assuming that you've got multiple connections in your board, or has there been an allowance made for what we would call a PV distribution board? So to amalgamate all of those inverters into one central point, has it included setting up an export meter so that you can deal with your export payments? Has it included scaffolding, edge protection, netting, skylight covers, all of those sorts of things? So you kind of really do need to break it down. It's more than just the total install capacity and the price.
Okay, well, look, thank you, all of you, very much. It's been an extremely interesting chat. I hope our listeners have all enjoyed it as well. I've certainly learned a great deal listening to all of you. Thank you for joining us on this Solarsense webinar. A big thank you to our expert panel, Tim Cook from Solarsense, Chartered Engineer Kathy Eberlin from Leading Energy, Ben Goodare from Renishaw, Michael Gowen from Plasser UK, and of course, Stephen Barrett, the MD and founder of Solarsense. Thank you. Apologies if we haven't managed to answer your particular question that you put on the chat, but please do get in touch with Solarsense via the website to get further information or to address specific queries. They will be delighted to talk to you, of course. In the meantime, thanks for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.